In the next presentation, Charity Otwell, Director for Critical Security Controls at the Center for Internet Security, CIS, will discuss how CIS controls offer a prioritized roadmap for building a strong security foundation and aligning with broader frameworks. Charity will share real-world examples from her governance and risk work in finance. Please welcome Charity.
Thank you. I am Charity Otwell, Director of the Critical Security Controls for the Center for Internet Security here at CIS. So currently, I am responsible for leading the team of engineers that source, research, publish, and maintain the critical security controls themselves, as well as the supporting ecosystem. I'm also responsible for the global adoption and evangelization of the controls and our supporting work. But before joining CIS 2 years ago, I spent nearly 2 decades in the financial services industry, from very small to medium sized, and eventually a top 50 bank in the US. So my background is heavily within the business continuity management space and eventually into the governance, risk, and compliance space. So all that to say, I've spent 90% of my career as a practitioner, just like you, in a highly regulated environment. I've seen the evolution of GRC as well as the overwhelming amount of regulatory and industry standards in which we are expected to demonstrate compliance. So I'm intending today to leave you guys with some of that experience, as well as the tools and confidence that you need to navigate your own path. So what are the critical security controls, or just controls as you'll hear me refer to them? So this is your best practice framework and the foundation to any cybersecurity program. Just like you wouldn't build a house without a blueprint, you can think of the control framework in that very same way, with the intention of it being the roadmap to your desired outcome. In this instance, our desired outcome could be a lot of things. Is it compliance? Is it scalability? It could be defense posture, or even maturity over time for your cybersecurity program. This control framework, or the CIS controls, are your guidance for all of those things. Additionally, CIS is a globally and internationally recognized cybersecurity standard. The controls themselves have been downloaded over 500,000 times, and 62% of those downloads are external to the US. But that's a vast reach, right, within communities all over the globe of cybersecurity experts just like you guys that contribute to the consensus-based best practices we support here at CIS. So for today, I'll take you through the controls, what they are, their benefits, how to use them, how to demonstrate compliance using our framework mappings and crosswalks to other frameworks. We'll get into the importance of utilizing automation to support and mature your vulnerability management process using tools like Qualys, as well as how to defend against top attacks. And hopefully I'll leave you with several examples of how in my own career in a heavily regulated environment, have used all of that experience to prepare for regulatory exams and sometimes somewhat spicy senior and board level conversations around the governance of enterprise IT and cybersecurity. So what are the benefits of the CIS controls? So this framework helps you to know where to begin. And in my experience as a practitioner, I often found myself asking that exact question. We have these IT services like patch management, IT asset management, and we think we have cybersecurity controls around our program, but where do I begin my assessment of the program, and how do I determine where to go next? Furthermore, how can we take that information and identify our risks? The controls also allow you to build your program over time, as I mentioned before. So by design, this is intended as your security roadmap, and not only for maturity and compliance, but can even be used as an on-ramp to other frameworks that may apply to you as the IT practitioner or the IT leader, or to you as the consultant providing that third-party assessment. So the controls are prescriptive, and you'll hear me say that a lot today, and to which in my experience with other frameworks, it really is what sets CIS apart. When working at the bank, we followed NIST Cybersecurity Framework, or CSF. It was what was referenced in the guidance handbooks from our regulators and what we thought was our only option. And I myself am a NIST advocate, and I think that the CSF is a great framework, but it's a lot of program level controls, and in my opinion and past experience, can be open to interpretation, which is not something you necessarily want when you're talking with an auditor or regulator. So removing subjectivity and being able to implement a set of prioritized actions like the controls with confidence truly provides an advantage for the demonstration of compliance. The controls take the guesswork out of what does this control statement really mean, and how are we going to provide evidence to our regulatory examiners and internal auditors. So here at CIS, we really put a lot of due diligence into making the controls prescriptive, prioritized, and only one ask per safeguard. So that one ask per safeguard is really where you'll find audit preparedness really comes into play. So what do the controls look like from a high level? As you can see here on your screen, there are 18 critical security controls, which are further broken down into how-to or safeguards, totaling 153 actionable items. As mentioned, these are already put into priority order for you. So take those first three controls that you see on the left side of your graphic. The first two are your inventories, enterprise assets, right? Software assets. And then the third is your data protection. And as I'm sure you've heard the saying, you cannot protect what you don't know. Those first three controls are really your starting point to establish your IT asset management process. And it's typically in most industry frameworks to begin here. So if you'll look, if you'll think of the control itself, such as let's take control number 7. So you can see here, control number 7 is continuous vulnerability management. So take that as the overarching what, right? What are we trying to accomplish? You can then think of the safeguards as your technical recommendations that provide tactical step-by-step for how to achieve that, which are going to be tasks, right, that support that overview, such as establishing a process for patches and remediation, which is going to be, establishing that governance around the control. So when you get into deeper safeguards, such as safeguard 7.4, which we'll talk a little bit more about later, that's where we recommend that you perform automated application patch management. So let's dive right into what I mean by implementation groups, which are essentially your implementation roadmap. So implementation groups are the bundled, prioritized actions that provide your roadmap guidance. It's incredibly important when adopting this framework to get a baseline and really any framework and build it over time. So like I mentioned before, there are 153 safeguards that make up those 18 controls. So how do you know where to begin? Implementation Group 1, or IG1, is where we advise any organization in any industry of any size to begin. So most importantly, the IGs are based upon the risk profile of an organization and the resources that are available to them. Managing an asset inventory in a very large shop with a dedicated staff and budget is going to look very different than a smaller shop with limited resources and skill sets. So by design, we've taken the safeguards, grouped them into an implementation map for you. So this is also your guide to essential cyber hygiene and what we recommend as the foundational starting point. IG1 also represents the minimum standard of information security for all enterprises and is prioritized and backed by data to defend against top threats. Keep that statement in mind, backed by data. I will cover that here shortly. IG1 also consists of 56 of those 153 safeguards. And as you'll see on this graph, each IG builds upon each other, representing the highest threat level as well as maturity level once you get to IG3, which would incorporate all safeguards. So as you can see, we take these 5 factors into consideration whenever designing the implementation groups: size and complexity of the organization, as well as their data type. We all probably assume that all large organizations have super sensitive data, which in large part is true, but there can be very small organizations as well with not a lot of resources with just as sensitive or even more sensitive data that would need to implement the most essential cyber hygiene, or IG1, to be able to defend against those top attacks. So we also know that manual processes for things like vulnerability management, asset management, are much better managed and effective, utilizing those automated technologies to mitigate risk. So given our audience today, I wanted to bring your attention that the CIS controls also identify and categorize the asset classes for you. So we truly agonized over this when I was in banking. When going through our, one of our first assessments was around IT asset inventory, and then eventually got into vulnerability management. And then, we're tasked with trying to determine what the application list was, per the recommendation of an examiner to improve our maturity. So, the examiner made a notation that, at this size bank, you really need to have governance and automation built into your processes. So we thought, okay, that should be an easy enough task. Let's pull the asset list and let's see who's responsible for patching which applications. And oh my goodness, you'd think something so very simple could have been achieved, but we couldn't even agree on the difference between a network device and what an application actually was. So I won't embarrass myself on how long that went on, but if I had known that this little gem that you're seeing on your screen now existed within the controls to determine the asset classes for me, and then the controls and safeguards are tied to those assets and their protections, it really would have made that audit year a lot better. I won't say enjoyable, but at least a bit easier to navigate and have those conversations. So let's talk a little bit about the controls ecosystem. This is another one of those things that I had no idea existed in my days as a practitioner. There's an entire repository of guidance and research and mappings to aid you in trending topics, implementation guidance, sample policies, which I'll talk about in a moment, and a plethora of other valuable artifacts that if I had known existed, it would have made my job so much easier and really helped inform my decisions and communication, right, to the leadership and even to the board of directors. So one of the key components of the controls is that we truly believe it is not about the list. We have an entire ecosystem of resources available for download to address some of the most common questions that surround managing a cybersecurity program that maybe you've gotten from regulators, maybe you've asked yourself, maybe you've gotten from peers or other folks in your organization. And as you can see, we've organized these and broken them down into answers to those questions. We've already answered how to use the implementation groups today. So let's take a look at a few of the other categories. These are available for download, as I mentioned, at no cost, in case any of these pique your interest. There's way too many today to go over, but they are available for download. So for today, I wanted to focus on minimizing threats and how the controls relate to other frameworks. So in order to minimize threats, you have to know what they are, right? And what techniques we are facing today and what protections you have in place. And really, what is the security value that they bring? So that's something that I'm going to address later in the presentation today, and it's called the community defense model. We also address how do I implement. We have multiple resources for implementation, from secure configuration recommendations, which is our CIS benchmarks, companion guides to aid the user in topics such as mobile device guide management. We have a cloud security guide, which walks you through the shared responsibility model when assessing cloud service providers and third-party risk, to bigger pieces of research, right, such as the cost of cyber defense and how to implement IG1 and what that looks like from a budget perspective. So we also address how the controls relate to other frameworks, which is incredibly important when demonstrating compliance. We have mappings and a tool available to show that relationship and give you a holistic understanding of where your program or the program you are assessing or auditing fits into the complex lens of multiple framework compliance, which I will demonstrate for you next. I can remember assessments being conducted around our IT services at the bank and having to pull them out manually and demonstrate how they showed compliance to, NIST or to COVID or to ISO, and how absolutely challenging that was. So keep in mind, CIS already has done those crosswalks for you. So let's jump right into the mapping. So as I stated previously, I've observed the evolution of governance, risk, and compliance over the years, and you are highly likely required to be compliant with multiple frameworks. It's actually what we refer to here at CIS as the fog of more. So there are so many frameworks available and evolving regulations that fog can impact your vision on where to go and how. So as you can see here, there are many security standards and frameworks that we have crosswalks to. I would recommend from experience that you use CIS Controls as an on-ramp or the starting point to map to other frameworks. We have around 25 mappings that the controls team manages and maintains through each version that is released. So whether it be ISO, SOC 2, COVID, NIST, just to name a few. And if you're not a framework nerd like I am, that's okay. What you need to know here is that CIS is committed to that interoperability with other industry frameworks. We really advocate for the end user to be able to easily see where their program falls and how to demonstrate that compliance. Also listed here is a link to our communities. Our content development is influenced by consensus in the communities. So you're welcome to follow it. It doesn't cost anything, and sign up. You can be part of that community or even see what other practitioners are asking or following. If you just have an expertise in a certain control, we always want to hear from you. So absolutely keep that in mind. So how can you get access to everything that I talked about with the mapping specifically? So we have a product available on our website called the Controls Navigator that makes it as easy as point and click to export and download your own copy of the mapping. So this is incredibly helpful for both the cybersecurity practitioner for implementation, as well as an examiner or assessor for compliance evidence, right? And so what you're looking at here is just a screenshot of that product. In this example, you see you simply select the version of controls. In this sample, it's control version 8.1, which is the most recent release from last year. And then you would select what other framework you'd like to see mapped, right, and simply export it. You can even break it down by implementation groups. So, for example, if you're starting with IG1 of the controls, but you also need to demonstrate compliance to NIST or ISO, you can simply select that mapping and download the crosswalk based upon your selection as compared to IG1. So I was actually having this conversation just the other day with one of our controls adopters, and as I often do, I asked, what can we do better? What are we missing? What can CIS improve upon? And she said, I sure wish I had a crosswalk to all of the other frameworks. We're in the process of building that out now across our whole organization. And I said, when I told her that we already have that available, she was ecstatic and said, I had just saved her six months worth of work that she was having to put on her team for the manual mapping. So again, if I had known this had existed in my days, talking to auditors and examiners, it would have made for much more informed communication. So sample policy for you guys, vulnerability management. Also found within that controls ecosystem I mentioned before is policy templates. So the fantastic governance-minded CIO I used to work for previously in banking required policies to be written in all of IT and operations, of course, as he should. But as I'm sure this will not surprise you guys, nobody in IT wanted to write them. So we ended up having to spend the money to hire technical writers to do this for us, again, for regulatory preparedness and in a huge time crunch. So if I had known that this suite of policy templates had existed as part of the CIS resources, again, it would have made my life so much easier. We have already put together for you policy templates to help guide the governance of your program. So for today, I selected the policy template for vulnerability management. And just as a sample. So what you're looking at here is the safeguards within control number 7 that should inform your vulnerability management policy. So these are simply a copy and paste from the control document itself and placed within the template for you. So this walks you through establishing the process itself, which of course is always step 1, all the way to our recommendation that you perform application updates on your assets through automated patch management. Right. The policy templates themselves are broken down into pre-populated verbiage from the safeguards that you saw before, and we have that for many controls, vulnerability management just being one of those. And that really covers that governance piece of it. And then the second section, if you will, in the template document is general guidance. We understand the difference between a policy versus standard versus operating procedures. And give a bit of guidance into what the document is intended for, right? Like what you should be assessing. It could be straightforward items like, the process you create must, of course, be approved. All of these items are not only intended to make the implementation easier and writing that policy easier with a guided approach, but also for audit readiness. The very first item on the audit request list is typically policies and procedures in my experience. So this is a key item and really would have been a lifesaver. And it's just another protection for your program and one that is often overlooked. So I highly recommend not only having a policy for your key IT processes, but also taking a look at the ones that we've already begun for you as a guide. All right. Community defense model that I mentioned earlier. So you heard me discuss that the controls are prioritized and backed by data. And as promised, I'm going to tell you why that is. So we approach this really in 3 parts. 1, What do we know? We've taken the threat intelligence that we have from multiple sources, such as the Verizon Data Breach Investigations Report. We've taken CIS internal threat data to understand what are the top threats. Secondly, what can we learn from that? Well, we evaluated it against the MITRE attack framework. And if you're not familiar with that framework, it breaks these attack types into attack techniques and sub-techniques. We took all of that information and we mapped it to the CIS safeguards, or what is protecting you from those attacks, right? Thirdly, what are we going to do about it? So this is what we call our community defense model, which drove the prioritization you've heard me discuss today, and essentially informs the sequencing of the CIS controls and implementation groups, as well as the benchmark recommendations. So what does this look like from a defense posture lens? What you can see here are the threat intel reported top attacks, beginning with malware, ransomware, web application hacking, insider and privilege misuse, and targeted intrusions. So that's our top 5. That's what we know. What this data means is implementing the only 56 safeguards within IG1, highlighted in green here, can defend against 77% of malware attack techniques, 78% of ransomware attack techniques, and on down the list of top threats. So when you get into IG3, which would be implementing all 153 of those safeguards, you can defend against 94% of malware attack techniques, 98% of web application hacking techniques. So this is incredibly powerful data and our most defensible research to date. This also puts facts in the hands of our controls adopters on why do we use the CIS safeguards and what does that actually give me. This research is widely used, again, available for download, and continues to evolve with evolving threat landscapes. We're already working on CDM 3.0. What you're looking at is CDM 2.0. I've had many conversations with IT leadership over the course of my career on what value are the services that are being implemented and the budget that is being supported. What value does that bring? You know, yes, we must demonstrate compliance. But in my experience, I've not seen any other framework owner be able to actually demonstrate their defense posture that's backed by data. So I'd be remiss taking part in a cyber risk series and not talking a little bit about risk assessment methodology. I'll wrap up our presentation today with a quick 5-minute overview on the CIS risk assessment method. But first wanted to set the stage from a legal lens and why we as practitioners should really care about the integrity of our control implementation. So we continue to see cyber incidents on the rise, right? And what an organization could have done better to establish a strong enough cyber defense, and when held liable in court, who is the responsible party? So this topic may have left you as practitioners questioning how much cybersecurity is enough, or what makes it reasonable. Is it reasonable enough to stand up in a court of law to defend your implementation? CIS has received the same feedback from our communities. Additionally, the CIS controls are increasingly being referenced more and more as an acceptable standard of best practices to guide that path by utilizing IG1. So we also continue to see state-level safe harbor statutes addressing these points with the need or requirement of demonstrating, quote, reasonable cybersecurity. For instance, I'll give you an example. The Court of Common Pleas in Philadelphia has listed the CIS risk assessment method that you see here as an example of reasonable cybersecurity. I'll tell you how. So we've taken a stance to address that. One being we have a reasonableness guide available for download where it points to the controls as an acceptable industry framework to achieve this. And where RAM comes into play is it's a resource to help you define what reasonable risk means and how that informs your enterprise risk management strategy. So a good example of that would be, say you have a small company or a financial institution that doesn't have the budget for penetration testing, which is IG3 level control, which is the highest level, right, of maturity. But if that would bankrupt the company, then they have demonstrated justifiable reasoning not to do it. So the goal of RAM is to provide that risk assessment methodology and intended to allow the practitioner to evaluate what matters and to accept risks at a level the enterprise has already agreed upon. So the solution that this offers is calculating risks in a way to prioritize the needs of the customers and business objectives to help you justify your investments. Examiners can see balanced risk demonstration for compliance as well as acceptable risk, but RAM guides that practitioner to prioritize. Again, that word prioritize that I keep saying, and it really helps to eliminate some of that guesswork on what's important to who and why. So, I leave you with a final thought on most of my experience with regulators was really around just that, right? Yes, they come in with a huge list of requests and you're thinking, oh my gosh, all of this evidence I have to pull and ask my team to pull. And then all of these follow-up conversations that I need to have with the regulatory examiners. This entire presentation is intended to help you with that preparedness. How have you prioritized what matters? We've seen the controls framework here today, how to demonstrate that compliance, and really how to improve your cybersecurity program maturity with automated solutions such as Qualys. And finally, how to have informed conversations with your peers, leaders, and auditors alike. I'll leave you with also several slides on the controls resources that we have available. Anything that I talked about, as I said, is at no cost to you. You can download the latest version of the controls and any of those resources that I discussed, CDM, any of the guides that we have. This is a link to our CIS Controls community and workbench. You saw that earlier. You can just sign up, follow what you want, see what your peers are asking, ask questions, contact us. And then this is our contact page as well. This goes directly to my team, and we certainly do monitor those and want to hear from you. And with that, I thank you and I leave you.